Welcome to the Palestine Church audio podcast. We hope you enjoy this week's sermon. For more great content and updates from Palestine Church, please visit us at palestinechurch.com.
Awesome. All right, well, let's get down to the word. And James called me yesterday, and he said, "Hey, man, they're really gonna love you if you preach really short." And I was like, "Okay." And then he says, "But they're really, really gonna love you if you preach a really long time." So I gave myself 3 hours to preach this morning. I hope that's okay. Can we all just be here for the next 3 hours? I'm just teasing you. No. We'll go through this quickly. Today, I just want to be a little bit gut level with you. I want to share just a word that God placed in my heart, and it actually happened last Sunday as we were in worship. And man, you ever have those moments where it's like someone comes to you and asks for advice, or like I know Daniel and Joel and James can relate to me, and even Jeff. Like you're about to preach a message, and that very message that you're going to preach or that advice you're about to give is the very journey that God puts you in moments before, or it's like you enter it into moments after. And this whole week, it's like I've been like in this battle of trying to just find that grace in like what I'm supposed to speak on this morning. And it's like, what in the world is going on? Like this is, I've done this before. Like it shouldn't be this hard to preach. Like I've done this multiple times. I've done this at the church where I worked at. I've done this in different churches that I've gone to speak at. And it's like I'm having a hard time of finding that grace. And then I felt like the Lord just revealed to me, it's like, this is why. It's because you're forgetting how simple it is to get back into the presence. And so I just want to invite you guys on this journey with me that I have been walking through this past week, if we can do that together. And so I want to read real quick. And if you guys have your Bibles or your iPads or your phones, we live in a very millennial Generation Z now. So I am trying to get with the program, and I have my faithful iPad right here. And I also have my Bible, so I'm good. So let's go to Matthew chapter 14. And we're going to read verse 13 through the 21. And when you find that scripture, I just want you to give me a Jeff Collins, Father. There it is, Father. If you need more time, just say, hey, hold up. All right, you guys all got it? Hey, come on. All right, it says this. And when Jesus heard it, he departed from there by boat to a deserted place. And real quick, I just need to give you some context. Jesus just got done hearing in verses prior to this about John the Baptist being beheaded. So he's in mourning right now. So when he heard it, he went to a deserted place by himself. But when the multitudes heard it, they followed him on foot from the cities. And when Jesus went, he saw a great multitude, and he was moved with compassion for them and healed their sick. When it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is already late. Send the multitudes away, that they may go into the village and buy themselves food." But Jesus said to them, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "We have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish." He said, "Bring them here to me." Then he commanded the multitudes to sit down on the grass, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke and gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitude. So then they all ate, and they were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of fragments and remained. Now those who had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. How many of you guys have heard that story before? I know I have, and it's always an amazing story. And actually, stories like this create something in me. It actually creates like this passion, this fire inside of me. I'm just like, my gosh, that was such an amazing testimony. It's like, I want to see more of that stuff happen. I want to see like God, just come and begin to multiply food or finances. None of you guys said amen to that. But no, seriously, it's like I want to see God just break out in miracles. And like we see the great multitude right there, and the miracles are breaking out. And to me, it's just like, oh my gosh, like that's so amazing. And just to even imagine like the disciples, like they're right there. I mean, they've been walking with Jesus already, and they get to just see miracle after miracle. They get to see Jesus just do what he does best. And I'm like, part of me is like, oh my gosh, like I can't imagine being there. Like, just imagine being with Jesus, the Son of God, doing miracles. And that's why I so love this story, because it even reminds me of like times where it's like I go to conferences or I go to like places or church events, or I have a moment with God when it's like I see him just break out and break through, or in healing, or in signs, wonders, and miracles, or simply just release a breakthrough in my life. And it's like I get so touched by heaven, and I just think to myself, it's like, oh my gosh, from this day forward, I never want to be the same. Like it's like God delivers something, and we automatically make like a vow to ourselves and say, I from this day forward, I will never be the same. And that's amazing. And that's why I love testimonies. That's why I love that when breakthrough comes, everything changes in a moment, and we get fired up, we get passion. And I love this story. But I want to continue because I want to hit home on where I'm getting to. And if we can go over to turn the page, or I guess I'm turning the page, but Matthew chapter 15, verse 29. And I'll just read this out of the version that I have. Departing from there, Jesus went along by the Sea of Galilee, and having gone up the mountain, he was sitting there, and large crowds came to him, bringing them all those who were lame, crippled, blind, mute, and many others, and they laid down at his feet, and he healed them. So the crowd marveled as they saw the mute speaking, the crippled restored, and the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they all glorified God of Israel. Man, I love that. I love that. We just hear about God doing a miracle with a great multitude, and now we're hearing God do miracles upon those that are sick and need healing, restoration. And it's like, my gosh, it's like, that's where I want to live. I want to live in that place. I want to live in that dwelling place where I am experiencing his goodness every single moment of my life. That it doesn't matter whether I'm at work, it doesn't matter whether I'm traveling or with family or with friends or with anyone, but I just want to experience the goodness of God. But we go down to verse 32, and it says this: Now Jesus called his disciples to himself. Actually, let me go back. Now Jesus called his disciples and said, "I have compassion on the multitude, because they have now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And I do not want to send them away hungry, lest they faint on the way." Then his disciples said to him, "Where can we get enough bread in the wilderness to fill such a great multitude?" And I just want to highlight just that verse real quick. Where could we get enough bread in the wilderness to fill such a great multitude? Hold on one sec. These are the disciples of Jesus. They've been walking with him we know for sure they've been walking with him for the past 3 days. And in the past 3 days, they've seen miracle after miracle. They've seen Jesus showing up in ways that seem impossible. And not only that, but one of the miracles that we saw was that Jesus fed a multitude of 5,000 plus people. But here, they come across 4,000 people, and the first question they ask Jesus is, say, how in the world are we going to feed all these people? It's like I have such an issue, and it's so odd to me that they would ask that question after experiencing the goodness of God. And I started thinking about it. I'm like, why in the world would they ask such a question after already being there? Like, I mean, literally being there. And then I realized to myself, I'm like, well, this story isn't just about the disciples. This story is about me. This story is about you. And the reason it's about me and it's about you is because how many times do we experience the goodness of God? We experience God move in a breakthrough or release a miracle, or we get our prayers answered, and we get so fired up with passion that out of nowhere, it's like moments later we just forget what we had just experienced. And there's something that has to be said about remembering what God has done. Whether it be in your life, whether it be in the life of the people that are around you, there's something to be said about remembering what God has done. It's so troubling that we as humans can be so forgetful. I mean, I'll share just testimony. I found myself, I'll use Jeff, you're here. I've been at Jeff's camp meetings, and I get, fueled up, and I feel this passion. I'm experiencing revival, and it's like as soon as I leave, like a week later, I'm still on fire. And I'm like, man, I want to go change the world. I want to go and just, be Jesus to the people. And next thing you know, it's like after the passion dies out, it's like I forget everything I'm experiencing. I find myself struggling again. I find myself maybe in fear or anxiety. And it's like, wait a minute, how did I go from a place where I'm experiencing the goodness of God to a place where I forgot everything I've experienced? Thank you, Jeff. And it sometimes hurts when you really think about it. It hurts to know that we can become so forgetful of the one who loves you. It can sometimes hurt that, in a way, we can sometimes use God. And I don't want you to misinterpret. God wants us to need him. I mean, that's his desire, that he would lavish us. And when we ask for things, he wants to pour out. Don't get me wrong in that, but in the sense of like, God desires relationship. He doesn't want to be like this thing that just pours out, and next thing you know, it's like, oh, I wish you would have, encountered me. It's like, but it's so scary. I mean, you might think to yourself, like, man, well, that isn't me. Like, I'm still good. Well, let me just propose some questions to you. I want you to go back in time to a time when you were first saved, when you first experienced and knew the love of Jesus in your life. I know in my life, it's like the very next day, I remember I accepted Jesus in my heart, October 31st, 2007. And I remember the very next day, it was on a Halloween night. There was like this special event going on at a church, and that's where I met Jesus. But I remember the very next day I woke up, and I always share this story, and I'll say it the way it is. I don't mean it. It's the way I can interpret it. But I wake up in the morning, and I open up my blinds in my room, and I look at the sky, and the sky is like so beautiful. I'm just like, oh my gosh, that is the most beautiful sky I've ever seen in my life. And then I look at this tree, this insignificant tree, this dumb-looking tree that's been there for years, but all of a sudden it becomes like the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my entire life. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, have you seen the tree out there? It's amazing. Like, oh my gosh, like, look how beautiful it is. Oh my gosh, look at the bird. Look at the bird on that tree. It's like I'm so wowed by the beauty of God because I have fallen in love with the Creator. And it's like, and I go forward, and I go and I go talk with people, and I want to tell people about what I've experienced, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you won't believe what happened over the weekend. It's like, I was at this service, and I just kind of went because my parents told me that I absolutely had to go, or else I was going to get kicked out again. It's like, so I just went, and the most amazing thing happened. It's like God encountered me, God touched my heart, and it's like everything's changed out of nowhere, and it's like everything is beautiful, and I want to tell people about this Jesus that I have met, and I want to tell you that you can have him too. And I have all this passion in my heart. And then years later, it's like I find an excuse not to do it because I forgot the joy of my salvation. And so it goes that deep. It really does go that deep. It isn't about just experiencing breakthrough, but it's even experiencing what God's already done one time. I mean, we can even go further back and just acknowledge the cross. Sometimes we forget the value of the cross. It's like we find ourselves struggling. We find ourselves like needing a breakthrough and all these things. And it's like, if you would just remember what Jesus paid on the cross so that you don't have to live that way, so that you can have healing, so that you can actually find breakthrough. If you would just remember and truly value it, you would find freedom. You would find peace. See, like I said earlier, the disciples themselves, people that were among Jesus, they forgot. And I think so many times it's like we even come on a Sunday morning and we hear an amazing message. I mean, I'll be the first time, man, I've heard many amazing messages. Especially with some people that are my heroes, even people that online where I'm watching, it's like, man, that was an amazing message. And I talk about it with, usually it's James, because that's the first person I see all the time, James. And I tell James, like, oh man, that was such an amazing message. I just got done hearing this message about of just saying I was wrong, like just admitting that you're all wrong sometimes and that it's okay to just go on to God. And I was telling James, man, I heard that amazing message. And then 3 days later, I get in this argument with my wife, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to admit that I was wrong. But I can easily forget what I've heard. I was actually doing a little bit of a study, whatever you want to call it, but it was a psychologist who has done a study on memory. And they said that the reason people forget things is because they don't practice on remembering things. And it's so funny to me that is the explanation as to why we forget things, that we just don't practice on valuing or remembering things. When Jesus, at the Last Supper, he said, do this as many times as you can in memory of me and remembrance of me. It's almost like he was actually coaching us and telling us, just remember. Just remember. When you feel like, oh my gosh, you're about to forget, just remember one more time. And it's like you think to yourself, like, how in the world can I remember every single moment of my life? Well, it's no different than breathing. You just got to do it. And so the way we step into encountering the presence and not forgetting the value is the same way we do when we come on Sunday morning, is that we take what we learn here and apply it to our lives. That 3 days from now, we wouldn't be in urgency of wanting a breakthrough and forgetting that God is the God of breakthrough. See, the fruits, or in other words, the lack of fruits that we experience when we forget are, sometimes we panic like the disciples did. They panic and they say, we don't have enough. Or we live in fear, anxiety, and sometimes it looks like trying to do things out of our own strength instead of leaning into the one who is strength. We lack fiery passion because we've actually abandoned our first love for God. In Revelations chapter 2, verse 4, it says, nevertheless, I have this against you, that you left your first love. I want you to understand that this Revelations is one of the last books in the Bible. And we see this journey of love. We see this journey of people walking with God, walking with Jesus. And everything's swell, everything's great. But even at the end, Jesus himself says, I have this against you, that you've lost your first love. In other words, you have forgotten what it's truly like to be in love with me. You've actually lost the fact that I am your provider, that I am the miracle worker. So if you're here this morning and you're needing a miracle in your life, then remember what he's already done for you. If you're needing a financial miracle, remember that he is Jehovah Jireh. When you need storms to be silenced around you, remember that he is peace. And if you're missing the passion or the fire for him, remember the testimony of your life. See, like I said, you might be thinking, it's like, well, I haven't had many miracles happen in my life. I haven't had, what you're talking about. So how can I remember? How can I remember what he's done? Well, it's simple. We're gathered here at a church. In other words, a family. And I'm almost 100% positive that someone in this room is either walking through the same thing you're walking through or have already walked the journey that you're currently walking through. And when you share the testimony, when you share what God has done in your life, you're actually releasing an invitation for God to do it again. Because see, that's what a testimony is. A testimony is an invitation for God to do it again. Or in other words, it's the revelation that God will do it again. So what are you lacking this morning? What do you need? Because he's already here. He's here. And he's just simply saying, beloved, come. Remember what I've done in your life.